All right, we are live. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to A Fictional Escapist. My name is Kris, and today I'm joined by two wonderful booktubers, Luke and Taylor, and they'll introduce themselves in a minute. We are here today to discuss Dragonflight by Anne McCaffrey. I don't think any of us have a physical copy of the book, but I read it on audio. I think these two did it on e-reader. This is arguably a pillar of classic fantasy, and the three of us have thoughts. So we'll chuck over to introductions first. Luke, tell us who you are, where people can find you, and then we'll go through to Taylor.
Yeah, of course. My name's Luke, and I'm from Luke's Book Nook, which is a small but growing booktube channel. I just passed my 200th subscriber yesterday, so I'm really happy about that. Yeah, and I do book reviews and TBRs and book hauls and all kinds of things on the channel. And this is great. This is my first kind of group discussion of a book, so I'm really looking forward to this.
Well, congratulations, Luke, by the way, on that milestone.
Thank
That's
you.
a big deal. Yeah. So my name is Taylor. My booktube channel is Made Between the Pages, as you can see below. I talk about all kinds of things on my channel. I'm also a co-host of Page Chewing. So I do lots of interviews with authors. We recently just did one with the founder of The Broken Binding, Matt. So I just like to talk to people from all over the community. So clearly I love discussions, and I am delighted to be here. And as Kris said, I have the thoughts. So I'm excited to bounce those thoughts off of some of the readers.
If anyone hasn't checked out Taylor's latest vlog for some of those thoughts, they are fantastic and ranty, and I hope we get some of those in today's discussion.
If you hit the right points.
We'll aim for it. That's where I'm aiming, just to get that rant out in this discussion. So I guess we'll start off with the background behind wanting to read it. And I know for me it was because it is thought of as a pillar of sort of, I guess, coming into modern and classic fantasy and bridging those gaps. Like, it did a lot of really cool things. So if we can go through maybe overall non-spoiler thoughts first and why we wanted to read it.
Yeah, I can take that to start, I guess. For me, last year, I made a classic fantasy TBR. And in typical goals fashion, I read exactly one of those books last year. So it's been my goal this year to continue on. And a lot of those, when I say classic, I mean classic in reference to when I started reading. So I am 31 now, so what's classic to me may not be considered classic to others. But Dragonflight definitely fell within that realm for me as predating when I was reading or really aware of the fantasy genre. And when I looked at people who, are older than I am, a lot of them referenced Dragon Riders of Pern, the overall series name. A lot of people reference that as, like you said, Kris, a cornerstone, something that did something new. So I always kind of wanted to read it for that reason. And when I saw that you were doing a read along, I was like, well, this is perfect timing for me to actually try to get some of this read, some of this TBR read. So that's kind of why I wanted to read it. Non-spoilery thoughts, I would just say it's a mixed bag for me. I'm really struggling, and that's why I'm glad that I have people to talk to about it, because I have some aspects that I really enjoyed and I thought were really unique. But then other aspects absolutely drove me up the wall and I hated them. So I don't really have any lukewarm thoughts. I have both extremes. So I'm kind of, it's really a mixed bag for me overall.
Yeah, I'm very similar in the fact that I'm kind of going through a classic fantasy journey as well at the minute. And, I'm 45, 46? 46. I don't even know my own age. 46. And so I'm kind of going back to, yeah, what is time? I've got an issue with time. I'm going to talk about that later. Anyway.
We didn't consent for it to move the way that it
does. So I'm kind of going into the likes of David Eddings and Tad Williams and all those classic fantasies that I kind of passed by when I was younger. And I'd heard of Anne McCaffrey and I'd heard of the Dragon Riders of Pern. So when I saw that Kris was doing a read along, I was kind of like, yeah, let's jump on and do it. So my non-spoilery thoughts are very similar to Taylor's in that I really liked some stuff and really didn't like other stuff. I thought there's some really cool elements that I didn't actually expect going in, which I was pleasantly surprised about. Yeah, and I knew that this was written in the 60s, so that has a part to play, definitely.
I think I'm similar to the both of you in that I loved the parts that I loved, and I was kind of surprised at some of the things that I did love in this book, particularly the sci fantasy elements that sort of come in towards the end. I thought that was really cool, and we'll get to what we thought was really cool in a minute. But I really hated the things that I hated about the book, and like to the point where I was listening to this on a 48-hour drive across the country, and there were even parts where Rach was like, no, turn it off, I can't do it. And I was like, are you actually listening to any of this? And she was like, yeah, I can't say it, family-friendly channel. No, I'm kidding. I swear, it's fine. Yeah, like, he's just a douche. And I was like, yes, he is. I'm glad that we both picked up on that. But I wanted to read it because I only really got into reading fantasy again maybe 2-3 years ago, about a year before I started the channel. And I was reading for like academic stuff, and then coming in for reading for pleasure again, I was like, okay, this is a pillar of fantasy. And then I ironically watched that video of yours, Taylor, where I was like, yeah, there's heaps of these that I also want to read. And that's how this all started. The desire to actually read it.
That
just
makes
came,
me so
just came
happy.
full circle.
We're bouncing
Ended
off
up
each
being-
other. I love that.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
I guess we will jump into the ends of the spectrum that we have. So let's talk about some of the stuff we really liked first, and then we'll jump into negative stuff because it's always nice to start with the positive, right? So I'll throw over and we'll just keep going the same. So Luke, if you want to share some of those cool story aspects that you thought of.
Yeah, I think the main one is then this idea of jumping from place to place and then jumping from time to time. I thought was a very cool aspect, which, as I said at the top, I was not expecting to come into that. I hadn't read up on the book. I didn't know it was a science fantasy book. I thought it was a straight up fantasy. So to have those aspects coming in to kind of introduced was really, really cool. And I love the idea of the between, this just kind of black nothingness, this cold. And the idea of like of if you lose the focus of your destination, the visualization of your destination, you can get stuck in between. And I found that quite chilling. I thought it was a really cool concept there. And this idea of these weirs that have gone missing and we didn't know, and the fact that it all comes full circle at the end, I thought was a very good concept. Really cool. Like time travel is something that you don't normally kind of do in fantasy, so it was a really interesting concept to have. I also really liked the fact that the world building, the actual world was kind of based on a feudal system in a way, because you've got these holds and they have to pay tithes to the dragon riders, and it's very similar to like a lord of a land, and the farmers have to pay the tithes to kind of basically stay there and offer respect to the owner or the lord. So I like that kind of world building aspect of it as well. It was really cool.
I totally agree with you there. I loved that. I also loved how there's a commentary on. We can go full spoiler now, right? Is that cool? Okay.
Oh yeah, this is a full spoiler. So if anyone is here for non-spoiler thoughts, just click away. This is
okay.
We're going
just making sure. Okay. Yeah. So I just like how the threads. It'd been so long since they'd come that the importance of the dragon riders had been lost to time, and so I like how McCaffrey really played with. Well, if I was a lord, I probably would also be like, well, why am I paying tithes to these people I haven't seen, these people that do nothing for me, and I don't see any return on my investment in a way. So it almost kind of was a really good commentary on war and how war is great for economies. It's fantastic for governments in many ways. It's horrible for people, but it's great for systems because it breeds necessity. It breeds, industry. And so I thought that was I don't know if that's what McCaffrey was trying to do, but I felt that commentary come through. And so when Lessa and what was his name? Fulan, I think. When
Falah.
Flaw.
Fulan, he's just going to be that douche for this
That guy.
conversation, but that guy. But when they were actually kind of happy and hoping the threads would come back, because at first it was this dreaded thing, and then halfway through the book, they kind of were like, if they came back, that'd be great, actually, because then we're needed again. And I really liked that plot line. It really got me thinking about it, because the lords aren't, I mean, that one lord in the beginning that gets offed is an awful person. But in general, the lords weren't exactly wrong in some of their ways of thinking. I think that's, I would have thought the same way in many ways. So I really liked that. I don't know if it was commentary on her part or not. It felt like it to me. And then the other aspect I really enjoyed is I'm a lore nut. I love mythology. I love origin stories. And so, like, The Ninth Reign behind me was my favorite book of the year. And it deals a lot with book of the year last year, by the way, but it deals with slowly piecing together the lore of this world and how those stories and that legacy affects today. And I think McCaffrey did that really well as well. And I just know that that's something I enjoy. So if it's not something that's like your favorite aspect of a story, it might not hit you as strong as it did me. But like the little songs you have to learn from and all of that, really enjoyed that. And that ties into what Luke said, the time travel, essentially. The sci-fi aspect of it, I think, was a really nice surprise woven in with the lore. So I would say those two aspects are the ones that really I liked.
Kind of bouncing off. Sorry, Kris.
No, you go.
You sure?
You go.
Just bouncing off of what Taylor said about like society built on war, on kind of military type thing, and as well as like war breeds money, war breeds like builds economy. War also allows excuse me war also allows the leaders to lead with fear as well, and a lot of these lords are paying these tithes because they fear the threads coming back one day. And that's kind of how the Dragon Riders have kept control for so long. And as that starts to kind of fall apart, and the all the hold leaders are getting more brave, and they actually approach the weir to try and take them down. So that aspect, and it's interesting because the 60s is a the 60s had the Vietnam War. So this, I think McCaffrey is doing a commentary of sorts, because I think that's where she's from. That's the context of what she's living in at the minute. And I think that really plays into how the society is structured and how the Dragon Riders put that fear into the hold lords and into the people to maintain control.
I thought, like, playing off on that concept, what was really cool as well is what comes from that. Like, yeah, war is awful for the people who are on the ground, but it provides such a sense of purpose for these people who had lost it, essentially. And they're like, what are we doing here? Because there is no purpose for this anymore. And then having that conversation come in and giving these people purpose again, and you can see them change just from having that sense of purpose come through. So there's good and bad to everything, right? And sometimes it's hard to be on one side of that conversation or the other, or to try and see it from both sides. But it's interesting about, like, I didn't even think about it being in the 60s and the Vietnam War potentially playing a part in that commentary while reading the book. For me, the coolest aspect of the story was the prose. Like, I also like lore, but I like the way that McCaffrey writes is captivating and it's magical. And I felt myself being so drawn into the story because of the way that she wrote. I feel like it was very purposeful. Like, she can write, and it was a way to get sucked into the story. And I'm a prose sucker, so that for me was just like captivating. Some of the words that were in the book were a choice, and I didn't like them so much, but the style of writing I really did enjoy. And I loved the the elements of the sci fantasy that came in and sort of shocked me, like you were saying, Luke, I didn't really expect that so much going into what people talk about is like a classic fantasy story and a pillar of fantasy, and then having things like the threads and was it the Red Star or whatever it was that came in towards the end and being such a, like, I feel like that part of the story came in super fast, and then I was like, what's actually going to happen here? Because there's like 2 hours left of this book that I'm listening to, and how is that going to wrap up? Because it's just ramped up in its intensity, and I really liked some of those aspects. The time jumping stuff was really cool as well, and I like the structure of, we're now learning something, so we're going to slow it down and really show you what that is. So there was a sequence that we had sort of, I guess, in the middle of the book where Lesser gets to learn how to jump between times after she's connected and bonded with the dragon. And I thought that was a really cool way to show us what was happening and really playing on that show rather than tell aspect of the book.
100%. 100%. And I think something that we haven't talked about yet, just to keep in the area of coolness, was the dragons. I mean, they're cool, I think. Cool. And they were really cool. I am a sucker for a telepathic connection with a dragon. Hello, classic fantasy that I read when I was a child. Like, I love it. And I feel like this is a larger discussion, but with like the grimdark wave and a lot of different waves of fantasy we've seen the popularity of things like, let's say, Aragon, or where there is this kind of wholesome telepathic connection with your animal companion. That seems to be a lot less popular. It may swing back around, everything's cycle, but it was kind of refreshing to read that kind of relationship again in a fantasy book. It was just, you bond with this animal and then you care for each other after that. And I really enjoyed that. And the other aspect about the dragons that ties into the sci-fi part that we're all talking about is, I was actually talking to Ryan Cahill about this, because he said that one of his inspirations for his Of Blood and Fire, or Bound in the Broken series, the dragons in there were the dragons from this story. And he said one of the things that he enjoyed the most is McCaffrey made a purpose for the dragons. They weren't like this cool accoutrement on the world. They were baked into it and they had a reason for being there, which blends a lot into the sci-fi aspects as well. And that really struck me when I was reading the book as well. That felt unique to me. They weren't just like cool, overpowered creatures. They had a reason to be there and an enemy to fight specifically. So, and an enemy that they were tailored to fight that no one else could. So I thought both of those elements of the dragons were pretty fun. There were some aspects of the culture, which I'm sure we'll get to when we get to the negatives, that I was like,
so you've got a really good segue there for the next bit.
Yeah, I was like, don't like dragon. But there were really cool aspects of it, and I did enjoy that a lot.
The actual the actual bonding process was quite brutal, though, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Like the fact that you've got all these children who are basically standing by the eggs, and if they're not wanted by the dragon, they're gone.
See ya.
It was. I was reading it, going, "Oh my god, this is." It was really quite brutal. But then after that,
they just throw them in there.
Yeah, they were just like,
yeah,
they don't even tell them what's going to
happen. Good luck, son. Like,
good luck. Hope you make it back out, boy.
Yeah.
It was good. It was quite brutal. But then once they're bonded, as you said, it becomes this really quite beautiful relationship between them both, and it was good. And I think that the whole aspect of that also plays into. And I don't want to go too much into this because this does lean into the slightly uncool things, but the fact that the previous werewoman was kind of, basically clinically depressed in essence, which was affecting the way the dragon was able to breed and reproduce. So that I found that aspect quite cool, but the reason for her depression I did not find cool. I didn't like it.
I love that you put a name to it.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I was just
no, you're right.
Cut you off, but
that's it. That's my.
I love that you put a name to it. Yeah, because like I just until you just now said the word depression, it clicked for me because I knew what it was, but I hadn't put that label on it, and yeah, that added a new dimension to it. Thanks for that.
Before we jump onto the not so cool aspects, because I feel like we all want to talk about those. Like, we're ready to start talking about it. There was one scene. Yeah, you've got your notes out and your highlights just ready to go for the not cool.
I'm going to let Taylor go first on this one.
Yeah, I feel like we should just give Taylor the space. Save space.
Finish
Taylor,
the happy things first.
Yeah.
It's not like, it wasn't a great scene in terms of happiness, but I thought it was really funny. Like, when you don't expect something to hit you in an amusing way in one of these stories. And it was the scene where Lessa had to control her dragon eating, and I was like pulling my dog away from eating something she shouldn't at the same time. She was like, no, you will not eat this thing. You can only blood it. And I was like, oh, well, just commentary on my life right now. So, like, get away from the toad or whatever was happening. But I thought it was really funny. But all right, Taylor, it's your time. Let's talk about some not so cool aspects of this story.
Where do I even start? Well, you know what? I'll start from something you said in sorry, Luke, you said. I have been doing lives for so long and I still can't get the mirroring down. Something that you said, Kris, which was the prose, right? So in the vlog that I did, I highlighted a particular passage that I thought was beautiful. And I'd like to read that here as a contrast to what I'm going to say next. So, it says here, it's in the middle of a sentence, but starting here, where relentless grass had forced new growth through the ancient mortar, green witness to the deterioration of the once stone clean hold. She can write. Like, the amount of information in that sentence. Before this moment, we didn't know that Lessa, where she was. We didn't know the context of the world that nature was not supposed to encroach, but that's all packed into this sentence, and there's beautiful words used to give us that information. And so after reading this, I was so excited, and that's why I was so upset when there were some choices made later. There's a quote that I think everyone who's read this book probably knows the quote that I'm going to say. It's going to take me a minute to pull it up, but in the meantime, just a TLDR is basically, Fla is talking about so one of the uncool aspects of the dragon mating is that no one thought to tell Lessa is that when two dragons mate, the human counterparts then must also mate and have sex. And they were like, oh, she doesn't need to know that. So when that happened, and then her and Fla have sex or whatever, after that, there's this quote where he says, oh, yeah, the first sexual encounter was violent, but, I might as well, every interaction we have since then might as well be called rape, but she'll get used to it. And there was I don't need an author to outwardly comment on something, and say that's bad, but the way that it was put here, so thoughtlessly, just plopped on the page, marital rape is fine. Clearly she can write, and she chose those words specifically.
It felt brutal listening to it.
Yeah. Yeah, listening to it would be hard, I imagine. Yeah. I have a lot of highlights, so I'm having a hard time finding it. But that was the one main quote that really we're going to talk later about contextualizing it, being a product of its time, things like that. But for me, that was just inexcusable. It's just blatant misogyny. So then that's the one that really set me off. But what was bothering me the whole time, and kind of the rant that I went on that Kris is referring to, is the not like other girls aspect of this book. As someone who was very much a tomboy when I was young, just naturally so, that kind of segued into a not like other girls adolescence, when you start to learn from society that being a girl is really not cool and being a boy is much cooler. So I think a lot of tomboys go through this process. It's kind of a part of growing up. But then you go through adolescence, which is difficult and hard. But then you hopefully come out of it a little bit more respecting of other women. And just to see the not like other girls aspect of this book baked in so thoroughly from a grown woman broke my heart a little bit. Because Lessa, our main character, any other woman who she comes in contact with we hear over and over again, thank God she's not like those silly other women. And it's so repetitive that by like the 5th time I read it, I'm like, I get it. Okay, you hate other women. I get it. You know, so that really got to me. And then any other women that were deemed semi-competent were killed off or seen as rivals, because you can't have 2 successful women. Get that out of here. It was such a constant, I guess is what I'm saying, that it really took over my reading experience. And again, I can contextualize a lot of things, and I'm sure that there were a lot of factors going into it. Possibly the fact that fantasy is still a boys' club, but it was even more so at the time of this. So she might have been writing for that audience. She might have truly felt that way, you know, who knows? But I do think I'm allowed to say, even though I can contextualize it, it really ruined my reading experience today, because it was just so baked into it. So that would be the start of my ranting. But I think that's the main thing, were those 2 aspects of the book.
I felt very uncomfortable reading a lot of the Flower and Lester scenes. The kind of thing that came to mind for me was Stockholm syndrome, in the fact that she was almost falling in love with her captor, and I found that deeply uncomfortable. And even towards the back end of the book, when their relationship has progressed, it still felt like that. And there was no kind of progression or equality in their relationship. Even though the Weir Woman is supposed to be this, you know, this figurehead of these male riders, it never, even though Letter is trying to break out of that tradition. And there is a good quote actually where she says that she's beginning to be nauseated by the word tradition, which is slightly ironic given the kind of patriarchal society that this book set in. But yeah, even then, it still doesn't feel as though anything's progressed within the relationship, and it still, to me, even at the end, feels like captor and captee, even though she's fallen in love with him by the end. So I felt that's how I felt through the book, and it was very uncomfortable reading.
That same exact word came to my mind when I was reading too. I was like, oh, there it is, Stockholm syndrome.
Yeah.
Like, did she fall in love though? I feel like they had no chemistry throughout the entire thing. The whole relationship was so whiplashy, and like,
no
do I like this guy? I don't like this guy. Like, and I was like, just don't be with him.
Well, the other thing too is he keeps saying, or she keeps thinking, well, I chose to come here. Like, this was, you know, where I chose to be. It's like, but did you really though? Because you were in rags. Like, you had no prospects. And he was like, I have prospects for you. No prospects. Like, how? There wasn't really much of a choice. So it was definitely a captive part to it. And I think, Luke, also you mentioned the not cool aspect of the previous werewoman's mental state, you know, her depression. I mean, you're taken away from everything that you know, and you're never allowed to leave. You're not allowed any social ties, and your only existence is to basically have sex and breed, because until Lessa, fighting was prohibited. So, like, how are you supposed to feel in that situation? Yeah. You know,
it's like because the previous Dragon Rider leader, what was his name? I did note his name down. Ragul, who was basically keeping the previous women basically just in this depressed state, which affected the breed, which then affected the amount of riders. And I suppose McCaffrey might have been trying to put into this deeply patriarchal society, but trying to put into this aspect of, if you don't let a woman fly, she's going to basically crumble away inside and die. So in that way, I think she is trying to put a female empowerment aspect in there, but it was so overshadowed by all the other horrible stuff that I think it didn't really get through as much as she maybe wanted it to.
That's a really good point. I think it was just so, like I said, overwhelming how many people would talk about how shitty this past werewoman was, that, like you said, if there was a commentary there, it really seemed to just be lost in the overarching like feel of the story, which is that thank God Lessa is not this other woman. Thank God. That's kind of what I walked away with, unfortunately. Even if that wasn't McCaffrey's intention.
I would agree with that as well. Like, I found Lessa both so annoying with the not like other girls thing, but also like a wet rag for a lot of it because of this captivity. Like, she didn't know anything else. Like, she's basically gotten into this relationship in this position, which she sort of knew that she would be able to do because of the law that we sort of hear at the beginning of the story, where she's like, I'm the only person who can potentially do this, so this is my duty and whatnot, and then having to go into that and then sort of being subject to, well, this is my life, so like this is what I have to do. And yeah, I just found it like very whiplashy is the only way I can describe it, where I was like, is she empowered, is she not, what is she doing? Because I can see that they're trying to give her little bits of empowerment and build her up in little ways, but then she's just like crash tackled by Falah all the time, anytime she's allowed to have any bit of growth. And I was like, that's very rude. Just let her have her moment, even if she's annoying.
Rude is one way to put it.
I'm trying to be polite.
No, I agree. I agree with both of you that there were definitely moments where I'm like, I think McCaffrey's trying to say something here, but it's not that nuance bothers me. If it was nuanced, if it was subtle, it wouldn't, I think, for lack of a better word, I guess, trigger me so much. But I think, see, I'm trying to strike a balance here because I don't think that authors have to be outright with their commentary. I think that there's a way to write it that's subtle and well baked into the world. But to me, I think this was just lost in the overtones of the book. So yeah, it really ruined a lot of my reading experience, which is a shame. And then at the end, when suddenly there's like this respect written in there, Flaw's like, oh, well, she can do XYZ. She went back in time and brought all these people back, so I should allow her to like make her own choices or something. That felt like a 180. I was like, this was not, where did this come from? And also the only reason that this respect is coming through is because she disobeyed you. Also, that word is used a lot in the book. I was like, you really like this word, don't you? Disobey and obey. But because she had to disobey him in order to prove that. So, and then it's coupled with a lot of shaking. There's a lot of shaking in this book. Shaking of Lessa.
Shaking and slapping.
Yeah.
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 Yes. I forgot I had a thought and it just left my brain. I'm
I'm
sure you
sorry.
saw it on camera.
I kind of put a couple thoughts in there. What was I talking about before I said shaking?
So the whole like girls aren't allowed to do things, and then when they do them, there it's like, oh, they can actually do that. I hate that so much in real life. Like, it boils my blood. So reading it is really uncomfortable because I will be like, boy, no. And I felt that a lot about Falah in this entire story. I was like, every time he was on the page, I was like, you're a dick. I just cannot. So my not cool story aspect is just Falah.
Yeah.
That's
in general.
That's a really good summary.
There's a line I've just found because I remember reading this, going, oh, Lesh gonna, she's gonna rise above and take control of her life and stuff. So the quote is, never again would Lessa lack an advocate, a defender, an intimate, aware instantly of the temper of her mind and heart, of her desires. No, she doesn't, because Fla.
Yeah.
It's just like that
Exactly.
quote there is like, there's so much promise in there and it results in nothing.
Yeah. 100%. And I kind of wish they did more with, I forget her dragon's name, actually. That's kind of
I've been trying to think of it this whole time as well.
Ramoth. I've noted it down.
Ramoth. There we go.
Yeah,
that's it. I wish they did a little bit more with her, because we have this psychic bond, and I understand that dragons need to eat and grow, and I definitely think that that's an important thing to show, because that's a big part of the world. But then even when Ramoth was full grown, she just kind of slept and ate and until they were able to fly. I kind of wanted her to have more of a role in the story, in the sense of starting conversations or having ideas, or it felt like a one-way bond almost, where Ramoth didn't have a lot of thoughts towards Lessa, but Lessa had a lot of thoughts towards her. And I was really kind of hoping to delve a little more into that. It didn't have to be in the empowerment realm or anything like that, but I wish we'd gotten to know her a little more, because I didn't feel that connected to Ramoth, by the end of the book.
Yeah, I think initially it was really sort of the initial bonding was really cool to experience. But yeah, that's something else I didn't really think about, was that was sort of it. And we saw her like scold this dragon and ride this dragon, but then there wasn't a whole lot of interconnectivity between the two throughout the rest of the book. And it just made me think of when Lessa was talking to Falar's dragon, and Falar's dragon had more respect for her than the people that she was trying to, work with towards this goal, with the threads. And I was like, that's an interesting take as well, because she has this ability to telepathically speak with these dragons, and the dragon was like, yeah, cool, I respect that. No one else did.
Yeah.
I mean, we got a lot of we got quite a bit of Ramoth talking to other dragons quite a lot telepathically, but as you said, Taylor, it didn't really hit me until you mentioned it. There is a one-way system quite a lot. So yeah, I mean, maybe we'll get more of it in the future books. I don't know, but I did like the aspect actually of the dragons telepathically, like when they have to telepathically put the image of their destination in each of the dragons' heads so they don't get lost in between. I thought was quite cool. But yeah, we could have had more of a conversational tone between dragon and rider.
I think that's a really good segue into the color me confused aspect of the story, of things that potentially didn't add up, because that, now that you both have mentioned it, is like, yeah, why didn't we get more of that in the story, since it was so important for that connection to be made as a plot point in the beginning?
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like it was such a core part of the story, so I'm not really sure why that particular connection was neglected. Whereas her talking to Falar's dragon, those were some of my favorite interactions, seeing her interact with the other dragons. So yeah, I'm not really sure why that choice was made. Also, the sci-fi time travel aspect is really cool, and I enjoyed it. But I'm not sure if I'm just like too dumb for this. But there were a couple moments where I thought it was a little plot holy. The time travel aspect. Just a couple of things seemed a little convenient. Oh, now we know how to do this, or now we know how to do that. But I don't know. I guess if I were to reread it, I think things would fall a little bit more into place. I think I was just annoyed with my reading, to be honest, annoyed with my reading experience at that point. So I was blowing through pretty quick. So maybe that's why the time travel aspect felt a little plot holy to me. But I did like that the lore, the tapestry, was the key to figuring out the science aspect. So I liked that combination. But I guess I'm not entirely sure more about the jumping forward aspect, where they sent people forward, and then how those time frames matched up. I was a little confused there. I'm like, so wait a minute. Going back made more sense than going forward for me, I guess.
Yeah,
there was definitely a part in the book where a lot of numbers were thrown out. Like, if we jump 10 spans, 24 spans, 234 spans, we can do this and we can breed all these dragons. And I was like, where are we going?
Because there was the bit where they were talking about basically sending a load of dragons and riders to a new weir, but they're going to have to go in the past so that the dragons grow up. So they reach an age at a certain point, but they have to go back. All that backwards and forwards. I was like you, Taylor. I mean, I'm usually quite good with science fiction and time travel, and I was just going, "What?" I was just a bit lost. And the bit where she goes all the way back 500 spans or cycles or whatever the time frame was, and then did little hops back. I didn't quite understand. I understood from her physical and emotional point of view, because it was really exhausting for her mentally and emotionally. But I just got a bit confused about the whys and wherefores of why they had to do what they did in terms of jumps and stuff. So that I got a little bit lost with that.
Yeah, I guess I understood the concept of like why to go make more troops, more dragons, and come back. Like I got that, but like you said, there was just lots of numbers, and I kind of got to the point where I was like, all right, I'm gonna trust you. Like I'm not gonna fact check you. Like I hope you're right because I'm not gonna
Me
figure it
reading
out.
any fantasy story. Yeah, cool. That sounds great. I'm just gonna go with it.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm sure it takes 10 days to get to that city. Great job. You know.
It was
Yeah, I think I
what
just
confused
kinda
me the
got there.
most. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, I was just finishing the point. That's all.
What confused me the most about this is there was a scene as they sort of discovered the time jumping very early on where someone has time jumped a couple of years and they came back unwell and they were like, I am unwell because of the time jumping and what's happened and I need to lie down and this isn't good for us. And then like at the end of the book being like, no, we can jump 24 spans, don't even worry about it, we can do it in like, you know, a few days and get 500 years in the future or whatever. I was like, is she sick? Are any of them sick? Because this guy was not well after however long he had jumped from and coming up with that time. Like I know there was a discussion about the years that they could do it where they wouldn't feel sick, but I was like, doesn't add up to me.
The only difference I got there was that they stayed in that time. Like they jumped ahead and like lived in that time. Whereas when they were jumping forward, they were like jumping quickly. But then that doesn't solve the issue of they would be sick living in the future time now, right?
Yeah.
So I would expect to see them sick in the second book. So yeah, it's a little confusing.
Because there was the aspect though, wasn't it, that if you inhabit the time period where there's another you and you get closer and closer to each other geographically, then you start getting really sick. You start getting, you know, you're turning quite bad. So I think that was an aspect to it, and the time jumping was just exhausting mentally and physically. And I think it was the kind of the spatial measurement of how far away you are from another of yourselves from a different time that was affecting them in the illness type way.
That's helpful, actually. That kind of went over my head. So that would solve the issue of the people who've now jumped now being sick. That would solve that issue. Yeah. Well, that was helpful. Thanks, Luke.
Yeah, that cleared up quite a bit.
But one aspect that I did find confusing, because when I read any book, I do like to have a sense of time passing. And until page 195, I had no idea that 3 years had passed since the beginning of the book. And for me, I find that quite jolting. I like to have a sense of time passing in books and just kind of have an idea of where we are. So I found that confusing. I was like, 3 years? Okay, whatever. But yeah, I found that quite jolting personally. It's just a thing.
I feel like it happened quite a bit. It'd just be like, oh yeah, and then after 3 years, it's like, oh, okay. Yeah. So Stockholm syndrome took a while to set in, at least.
I'm reading Malazan right now, so like big time jumps. I'm like, oh, whatever. It's been 400 years. Great, there's new gods here. Sweet. Like,
talk about just going with it, right?
Yeah. I am still unsure why we're building flamethrowers. I put this in the Discord earlier. I was like, why are you're riding dragons? You've told us about them breathing fire. Why are we building flamethrowers? That was the bit that confused me the most out of the entire book.
The only explanation I can think of for that, or what I got from it, is there aren't enough dragons, so they basically need the humans to be able to do the dragon's job, which is why they need a human version of Dragonfire. Is kind of why that didn't jar me, I suppose. Because if a dragon's busy elsewhere, then the humans can burn the threads in the ground, was what I got from it. But
that makes more sense, because I was just like, why? Why are we doing this?
But now they've got all the
But now they've got 500 or so dragons. And
exactly, yeah, they've got 500 dragons now. So
they're fine.
Yeah,
they're all
pointless.
good.
Yeah, you're right. They are still building the flamethrowers, even though they have all the dragons now.
Even though 3 years have passed and they've not made any progress on it.
Yeah,
that's just human stubbornness, isn't it? Nope, we're going to carry on.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly.
We're not stopping.
All the Flintlock fantasy lovers out there going,
Yeah.
guns, magic.
Yay!
Like, what? Yeah.
They can fit. It's fine.
Yeah. All right. So I guess the discussion, the controversial take, I don't know, probably not for people in this room, is the argument of a book being a product of its time. So Dragonflight by Anne McCaffrey was written in 1968, I think is the year that it was released. And there was some small discussions over on the Discord about, being uncomfortable with some of the misogyny that was coming through very early on in the book. And is a book allowed to be a product of its time and enjoyed for what it is, or are we allowed to be uncomfortable with it because of the context that we're reading it in this day and age? So there's a discussion to be had there. I will throw over to Luke first, and let's talk.
I think we can appreciate a book being the product of its time and feel uncomfortable about it. I think we're allowed to do both. I think it's very interesting because this is in the 60s, and what I thought about when I was reading this book was the astronauts' wives in the space program were kind of very similar in the fact that they were almost reduced to the role of a housewife and almost a trophy to put in front of the cameras, whilst the men were doing the work in space, and the wives literally had to do all the press interviews. They had to look pretty. They had to have a certain look, and that I find that very uncomfortable. Of course, I don't like that. I think it's a very patriarchal construct, but it is a product of its time. And I'm a big space program junkie. I love all that stuff in the 60s, but that particular aspect, even though I appreciate what it was for that time, I personally feel uncomfortable, but I still read about it. I still find it interesting. So that was in the back of my mind as I was reading this book, and I appreciated. I think appreciate's probably the wrong word. I understood why it was the way it was and why Anne McCaffrey was probably writing. I think it plays into what you were saying, Taylor, about fantasy was very much a boys' club in those times, and maybe she was trying to kind of step in line with the lads and read a book that boys would read. But yeah, it's a. I personally felt uncomfortable. I don't think we should ever censor stuff like this. I don't think we should ever erase it, because I think that's important to kind of look at historically. But I think we have to definitely look at it through the lens of today and talk about the aspects that make us uncomfortable, that seem wrong in society now, because I think that's how we grow as human beings and evolve as decent people. So I think in that aspect, we shouldn't erase it. We should appreciate it for what it was, but we can feel uncomfortable, and we shouldn't stay unspoken about it either.
I think you just said that beautifully. That really encapsulates a lot of what I think as well. I am able to contextualize why a lot of the things that made me uncomfortable are there, but that doesn't mean that I have to not say that they make me uncomfortable, if that makes sense. I mean, the person who gets brought up ad infinitum with this discussion is Tolkien, right? So there's a lot of othering in his books that is questionable, very, very questionable. And there's no way to really work your way around that. But there's so much else to enjoy in the story, right? So that's why I think a lot of people still enjoy his work. In the way that we talked about this book, there's a lot to enjoy, even though there's some stuff that makes you feel icky. So I 100% agree with you, Luke, that it's important to not censor, because it's the contrast between where we are now and where we were then that allows us to grow. If we pretend everything was the same the whole time, there's really no growth to be shown. So I think it's very important not to change these texts. But I do think it's important to be able to talk about why that growth has occurred and how we think that might be a good or a bad thing, or those discussions are very key. And I also think that it's important that when we talk about what bothered us, we don't overstep the line into telling other people how they need to feel about the same work. So just because this bothered me to the point where it ruined my reading experience doesn't mean that, for example, if you, Kris, or you, Luke, didn't feel so strongly about that aspect and enjoyed it overall, that I'm going to think you're horrible for not seeing the points that I saw. Because I think all of us have very unique intersections of identities where things from the past may bother us more or less than another person. And that's just the nature of the subjectivity of reading. So I think we just have to be careful when we talk about these things in saying that if you enjoy said classic fantasy, you are a terrible person, or you are XYZ, or you're ignoring this, that, and the other, because I think it's a lot more nuanced than that. So I think that's the one thing I would tack on to what you said, Luke, is that these discussions are really important, but I think it's also important to, along with context, have some nuance for how someone else might feel about the same text, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, for sure. I was just like rapidly looking up publication dates of other like classic fantasy to see what dates were in and some of the ideas that were coming behind it. And this was written earlier than things that people within our age group would probably consider classic fantasy. So I looked up I, the World, for example, published in 1990. And, that series, or I've only read the first two books, so I can't speak for the whole series, did have some progressive thoughts on women being in power. And, Assassin's Apprentice in 1995. And I was like, okay, so these are things that, me being 32 now, is like, I would consider that classic fantasy, but people who were growing up in this time of 1968 would consider that, something completely different. So there are subjectivity to what people enjoy, what people grew up with as well. And I think there's discussions to be had around that. And I agree, there are definitely things in this book that I enjoyed for the story aspects, but because of how I was brought up and my own lived experiences, I was like, I don't appreciate reading that, and it does make me feel uncomfortable. But I agree with you don't tell people what to think. You don't get to dictate what somebody else enjoys. And, the argument there is, I'm trans. I won't touch a J.K. Rowling book ever again in my life because of the things that have happened there. But there are people who are not in my community who have no idea what is going on. And I'm not going to tell them, no, don't go and enjoy Harry Potter. A lot of people grow up and love those books, and they just have no idea. I don't want to take that away from them. So I think, underlying it all, it's read what you choose to read. It's not my place to judge you for it, but we can still be like, not for me at the end of the day.
Well, I think there's a difference between critique and telling someone else how to feel. There's a big difference there. Sorry, Luke, go ahead.
Yeah, no. I was just thinking of Starship Troopers by Robert Heinlein, which is an incredibly divisive book because of the again, the time that he was writing at. The book has a very heavy militaristic philosophy that I personally find deeply uncomfortable, but I know people will raise that book as one of the pillars of science fiction. I personally don't think that, but I would never presume, as you guys have said, to tell someone that they shouldn't like it because of what the content and what the politics of that particular book is. So I think it kind of crosses over to this book as well. And I think if you enjoy this book, I'm not going to call you a horrible misogynistic horrible person, because you've obviously connected with aspects of the book that maybe me or you, Taylor, or you, Kris, haven't. So yeah,
and I think I'm going with take the most generous interpretation of someone's reading experience that you can, instead of the most ungenerous one, that word. So instead of assuming you read this book, therefore you must be okay with the misogyny in it, or that's what you connected to, is really presumptuous, I think. Whereas, like you mentioned, Kris, people grow up with stories. Maybe this was the first book for someone where a woman was in a position of power, because she is arguably in that position. And maybe that meant a lot to that person. So I think, this is a whole other discussion. But I think through the internet, we tend to lean towards the most... the least generous interpretation of someone's, thoughts, rather than going towards the other end of the spectrum. So I try to check myself if I feel like I'm doing that with other people's tastes.
That's such a powerful tool as well, to be able to go, what are my beliefs and how are they affecting what is happening right now. But it's such an interesting discussion to have, this product of its time. Like, there are books out there that I won't read because I have, heard from people not like rousing on it, but just themes within certain books. I'm like, not for me. And I think that's just comes into that subjectivity as well. So the hot question, Luke and Taylor, are we continuing on with this series? I'm not convinced either of you.
Listen. Yeah, y'all didn't convince me, but let me put this out there. Once this goes live, if you're watching this, drop in the comments down below if you've read the whole series. I need to know if it cools down a little bit on some of this stuff, because I do think bringing the traditional societies from the past to the present could really shake up things. We've even seen when we were in the past, the women there seemed to be given commands. They seem to have a way different vibe going on there. So it could be that McCaffrey was setting up contrast for later in the series. So this is how shitty it got. Here's, now we're going to shift it to what true tradition was, or, that could be coming. And maybe McCaffrey was just a little heavy-handed with this is how crappy things have gotten aspect in the first book. That could be a thing. But if it really does continue with the same vibes, I'm not. I got a lot of books to read.
How many other series have you got on that list, Taylor?
at least 10. At least 10 others. So I did read Terry Pratchett Guard, so that's 2. It's 2 off the list.
Love that book. Love that book so much.
Yeah, I had a really good time with it. Yeah, I had a really good time with that one. But yeah, I'm not convinced. So maybe if someone leaves a comment down below, just kind of lets me know without spoilers, just overarching trajectory, I could be convinced. But based on book 1, not looking good. What do you guys think?
I would, from the basis of the fact that we have talked far longer about the negative aspects than the cooler aspects, I think should be a slight indicator of where we're going with this. But I'm with you. If someone in the comments has read the series and this is going to start changing, then I might be willing to carry on. I am convinced Flar ain't changing. He's going to be a misogynistic dick for as long as that character is alive. I just can't see that man changing at all. But I'm willing to give it a go if I could be convinced otherwise by any commentators below who read the series. As Taylor said.
If Flar dies, leave a emoji below. We don't want spoilers.
I take it back. If he dies, I'm in. Yes, count me in. I need to see that man's corpse. Yes.
Look, I'll take one for the team. I'll do the second book, and I'll let you know on the Discord whether it's worth going on.
You are doing God's work, Kris.
That's
I'll just
that's a sacrifice.
I'll just put a stop sign in the Discord. Be like, no, stop. Flar doesn't change ever. Or like a tick. I don't know, but I'll do it. I've nearly done this audio book, so I should have it done by the end of Feb. We'll see. I really enjoyed the audio experience. I will say that the narrator did a fantastic job. If you're an audiobook consumer, her voice was very pleasing to listen to and very captivating as she was speaking. So maybe that made my enjoyment slightly better. I don't know. So wildcard, again, I just said that was the last question for everyone. Ratings. Where are you sitting out of your star rating?
I'm sitting on a 2 right now, maybe a 2.5. I mean, like the cool aspects were really cool, but the longer I sat on this book, the more I felt like I just didn't enjoy myself for probably the last, for not the last half. That was actually the cooler part, but the middle chunk there, I was not having a good time, and I was page counting, and that's never a good sign if you're page counting. So I wasn't like viciously angry when I finished this book. So it was definitely not like a 1-star. I reserve that for things that make me upset, but was it an enjoyable reading experience overall? Not really. So I'm sitting at a 2.5 right now.
I gave it 3 on Goodreads, and I think I'll probably stick with my 3, maybe 2.8, 2.75.
So
I like
specific.
2.75. It's lowered by 0.25%.
I think I ended up giving it a 3.5, but I think I'm sitting around a 3. Just probably.
I feel like it's
probably,
one of
like,
those
real middle
books
of the
that
road.
like. Well, there's some of those books though where you give them a score right after, and then you sit on it, and it goes up a little or it goes down a little. And I feel like this is a case where I was probably sitting at a 3 around when I finished it, and it just got lower the more I thought about it. So, just one of those experiences, you know.
Right. Well, now the world and the internet knows how we feel about Dragonflight by Anne McCaffrey. So I'll say a big thank you to Luke and Taylor for taking time out of your day and joining me on this discussion and over in the Discord as we read it. It was an experience at the end of the day that we've all shared together. So thank you for joining me on this venture.
No, thanks for hosting it. And I'm down for future buddy reads. I love the best thing about BookTube for me is book discussions like this. So, you know, I'm always in.
I need to get
And
better at taking notes
Yeah.
for book discussions.
Sometimes the books that we didn't really enjoy actually kind of make the best kind of conversations and discussions. So this has been great. It's been really good.
Awesome. Well, we'll sign off. We'll say goodbye. Thank you to everyone who has joined us. This will probably go live tomorrow, but you're already seeing it because it's now the end of the video and I haven't clicked end stream yet. So we'll just sign off and say goodbye to everyone. Thank you for joining.
Thanks, guys.
Bye-bye.